The afternoon sun spilled lazily through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the small, neatly kept living room. Julian sat on the edge of the sofa, fingers tapping against the armrest, heart a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The quiet hum of the city outside felt distant here, in his aunt's home, a place that should have felt familiar and comforting, but today, it carried an undercurrent of tension. Julian wasn't the kind of person who sought attention, nor was he particularly reckless. Yet, his life had always been filled with secrets, small, carefully guarded truths that only he knew. Among them was his fascination with crossdressing, an intimate world he had explored mostly in the solitude of his room. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could experiment with identity, beauty, and expression without fear of judgment. But today, that sanctuary was about to be thrust into the open in ways he had never imagined. His aunt, Veronica, had always been a force of nature, charming, intelligent, and unapologetically manipulative when the situation suited her. She had a way of making people feel as if their lives were threads in her tapestry, easily shifted to fit her whims. Julian had always admired her cunning, but he had never realized just how far she would go to bend circumstances to her will. The first clue had arrived innocuously, a text message from Veronica earlier in the week, requesting Julian's presence at her home under the pretense of helping with some family errands. The message had a peculiar undertone, playful yet commanding, hinting at an opportunity he could not ignore, but he had little idea what lay ahead. Julian shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, recalling the last conversation he had had with his girlfriend, Emma. Emma was sharp, independent, and fiercely protective of him, yet she had a curiosity about his secret life that occasionally manifested in teasing questions and knowing glances. Their relationship was anchored in trust, but even she didn't know the extent of his private explorations. Emma's presence in his life had brought both comfort and tension. Comfort because she accepted him in ways others didn't. Tension because the thought of her discovering his crossdressing before he was ready filled him with dread. Today, all those fears and excitements would collide. Veronica had hinted at a game, something involving transformation and role-playing, but the details had been deliberately vague, leaving Julian both intrigued and apprehensive. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of a wall clock. Julian glanced around, taking in the familiar yet alien details, the polished wooden floors, the antique furniture, and the subtle scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Each element reminded him of the power Veronica wielded in her environment, how easily she could manipulate the space, the mood, even the people who entered it. And then she appeared. Veronica stepped into the living room with a smile that was both warm and inscrutable. "Julian," she said, her voice smooth, almost musical. "Thank you for coming. I have a little arrangement I'd like you to try today. Think of it as a test and exploration." Julian's heart skipped a beat. He had expected something casual, perhaps a minor errand or simple assistance. But the way she framed it, as a test and exploration, hinted at something much more personal. His palms were damp, and he felt a flush of nervous excitement creep up his neck. Veronica gestured toward a neatly arranged box on the coffee table. Julian approached it cautiously. Inside were clothes, accessories, and even a wig, each item carefully selected and undeniably feminine. A silk dress in soft pastel shades, delicate jewelry, and shoes that seemed impossibly high and elegant. His breath caught as he absorbed the sight. Veronica's eyes sparkled. "I thought it might be fun to see if you can step fully into the role of my niece for the afternoon. Don't worry, I'll guide you. But the challenge is to make it convincing, to live it as fully as possible." Julian's mind raced. The excitement, the thrill of transformation he had always indulged in privately, now loomed large and public in the confines of her house. Every instinct told him to hesitate, to refuse, yet another part of him, the part that had longed for acceptance, for the experience of embodying his feminine self, buzzed with anticipation. He nodded, unsure whether it was courage or compulsion that guided him. Veronica's smile widened, sensing the spark of compliance. "Excellent," she said. "Then let's begin." Take your time, but remember, this is a test. How fully you embrace it will determine how far you can go." Julian retreated to the guest bedroom, where a full-length mirror awaited him. The silk dress lay on the bed, soft and inviting. He hesitated a moment, his reflection showing the boy who had always hidden this part of himself. Then, with a deep breath, he began the transformation. As he slid into the dress, the fabric whispered against his skin, stirring a mix of vulnerability and exhilaration. Each layer of clothing, each accessory he added, heightened the sensation of becoming someone else, a girlish niece, delicate yet bold, visible yet hidden in plain sight. The wig, carefully adjusted, framed his face, altering his identity with a subtle magic that left him both astonished and breathless. Veronica peeked in, her expression approving. "Beautiful," she said softly, as if pronouncing a verdict. "Now walk, speak, and carry yourself as her. Remember, confidence is key." Julian took tentative steps, the high heels unfamiliar but intoxicating. Each movement required concentration, a balancing act between grace and authenticity. He felt a strange empowerment in the vulnerability, a rush that came from presenting this hidden facet of himself to someone who both challenged and understood him. As he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized the figure staring back, a perfect blend of his own essence and the persona he was meant to embody. And yet, behind the reflection, a flutter of doubt remained. Could he maintain this illusion when others arrived? Could he navigate the subtle social minefield Veronica had hinted at without faltering? Veronica's voice drew him back. "Remember, Julian, this is more than clothes. It's about presence, attitude, and the ability to inhabit a role fully. Are you ready to meet the others?" Julian swallowed hard. He was ready, ready for the thrill, ready for the challenge, ready for the suspense that lay ahead. But even as excitement coursed through him, a tiny knot of fear lingered. How far would this scheme go? What if he faltered? What if his secret life became public in ways he couldn't control? The door opened, and the first of the guests arrived, their eyes widening slightly at the sight of Julian. He stood taller, shoulders back, voice steady, projecting confidence he barely felt. The game had begun, and the afternoon promised a labyrinth of emotional tension, playful seduction, and the exhilarating danger of being fully seen. In that moment, Julian realized that this was no ordinary day. This was a test, not just of his ability to perform, but of his courage, identity, and the delicate balance between secrecy and revelation. And with Veronica watching, every step, glance, and gesture mattered more than ever. The soft click of the door closing behind him left Julian in a bubble of anticipation and nervous energy. Alone in the guest bedroom, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. The clothes on the bed weren't just fabric. They were a gateway into a persona he had only ever explored in private. Today, he wasn't just cross-dressing for himself. He was stepping into a role, one carefully orchestrated by his Aunt Veronica. He started with the basics, a silky camisole that clung to his skin, smooth and comforting. The sensation of fabric brushing against him awakened a thrill he hadn't expected so early in the process. Next came the dress, a pastel pink number, flowing yet form-fitting, its hemline brushing delicately against his thighs. Julian hesitated before sliding it over his head, feeling the transformation begin in earnest. The reflection in the mirror was starting to shift, his body becoming someone else, yet undeniably still himself. Veronica's words echoed in his mind. It's more than clothes. It's about presence, attitude, and the ability to inhabit a role fully. Julian knew she was testing him, not just to see if he could wear the clothes convincingly, but to see if he could internalize the persona, embodying the confidence and charm of her imagined niece. He moved to the accessories. A delicate necklace, subtle earrings, and a thin bracelet completed the ensemble. Each piece added weight and texture, subtly transforming his posture and gestures. The final touch was the wig, a cascade of soft curls that framed his face and softened his jawline. As he adjusted it, he caught his reflection, the The boy he had been moments ago had melted away, replaced by someone more feminine, more exposed, yet strangely empowered. The thrill of vulnerability coursed through him. He felt a mix of excitement and anxiety, the exhilaration of stepping fully into his hidden self, combined with the fear of being seen and judged. This tension became a pulse in his veins, quickening with each adjustment of his outfit. Veronica's voice interrupted his thoughts, soft and approving. "Beautiful, Julian. Now practice your stance and movements. Walk, speak, and carry yourself as her. Confidence is everything." Julian stepped carefully in the high heels, teetering at first before finding a rhythm. Each step forced him to focus, to recalibrate his balance, and to inhabit the character Veronica had designed. With every movement, he felt a subtle shift in his own perception, a blend of vulnerability and newfound poise. Hours passed in preparation and rehearsal. Julian experimented with gestures, tone of voice, and expressions, trying to anticipate how his aunt and the visiting guests might perceive him. He practiced smiles that were playful but controlled, laughs that sounded natural yet girlish, and posture that suggested elegance, without stiffness. The more he practiced, the more he felt the persona settling in, like a second skin that both liberated and constrained him. The first challenge came sooner than expected. Veronica entered with a tray of refreshments, her eyes assessing his progress critically. "Julian, you're adapting quickly, but remember, small details make a big difference. Tilt your head slightly when you laugh, and let your hands move naturally. You must seem effortless." Julian nodded, swallowing a lump of nervous excitement. He followed her instructions, watching carefully as she demonstrated movements, her every gesture exuding ease and authority. He imitated her, attempting to absorb her confidence, but the internal struggle remained. Half of him thrilled at this liberation, half of him terrified at exposure. Then came the suspenseful twist. Veronica announced that the neighbors would be dropping by shortly to meet her niece. Julian's heart leapt into his throat. He wasn't prepared for strangers, people who might scrutinize his appearance and mannerisms. The thought of being evaluated, of possibly failing to maintain the illusion, caused his pulse to spike. Veronica's hand on his shoulder steadied him. "Relax, Julian. This is part of the test. How you handle it will determine everything." The doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected. Julian's breath caught. He practiced a few deep, controlled breaths, straightened his back, and adjusted his wig. With trembling fingers, he smoothed the hem of his dress, stepped toward the living room, and opened the door. The neighbors were friendly but curious. "Oh, you must be Veronica's niece," one said, her tone warm. "You look lovely." Julian's heart raced as he smiled, voice pitched slightly higher, laughter light and airy. Every instinct screamed at him to falter, yet he held firm, projecting confidence. The neighbors' approving nods and compliments sent waves of both relief and exhilaration through him. Each interaction reinforced his role but also heightened the stakes. One misstep, one slip of authenticity, and the illusion would crumble. Hours stretched on as Julian navigated conversations, gestures, and casual interactions, all while maintaining his persona. The physical transformation had been completed, but the emotional transformation, living as this girlish version of himself under scrutiny, tested him far more than he had anticipated. The thrill of embodying the persona was intoxicating, yet each laugh, each gesture carried the weight of suspense. By late afternoon, Julian's exhaustion mingled with exhilaration. He had succeeded in maintaining the facade, impressing Veronica, and handling the social interactions without faltering. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. He knew the day was far from over. Veronica had more challenges in store, each designed to push his limits, to explore the depths of his comfort and identity. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the room, Julian caught his reflection once more. The girl in the mirror was poised, charming, and undeniably feminine, but Julian felt the duality more sharply than ever. He was both observer and participant, self and persona, trapped in a thrilling tension that made every movement, every glance, every smile carry monumental significance. Veronica's approving smile broke his reverie. Well done, Julian. But the day isn't over. There's one more challenge, one that will truly test your ability to inhabit her fully. Julian's pulse quickened. He had adapted, he had transformed, but the real suspense, the part that would determine whether he could survive the test, was just beginning. The evening had settled into a tense quiet, the kind that buzzed just beneath the surface, like the calm before a storm. Julian stood in the living room, adjusting his dress and wig one last time, feeling the familiar thrill of vulnerability mingled with nervous excitement. Veronica had left him with precise instructions. The final part of the test begins when I leave the room. Handle it alone, but remember, every movement, every word, every glance counts. No sooner had she slipped out than the first obstacle emerged. A soft knock sounded at the side door. Julian's heart skipped. Who could it be at this hour? Trembling slightly in his heels, he crossed the room, smoothing the fabric of his dress as he opened the door. To his surprise, it was his cousin, Clara, her expression unreadable, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his appearance. "Well, wow," she said slowly. "You look really different." Julian forced a bright, girlish smile, raising his chin with a hint of practiced poise. "Thanks, Clara. I'm trying something new today." Her gaze flicked over him critically, lingering on the wig, the dress, the delicate accessories. Every second felt like an eternity. He felt the adrenaline in his veins, a mix of excitement and dread. This was the true test, maintaining the illusion under scrutiny, improvising under pressure. Clara stepped inside, her presence a subtle threat. She was sharp, intuitive, and notoriously difficult to impress. Julian felt the weight of every gesture, every word. One wrong move, and the carefully constructed persona could crumble. "Come on, show me how she moves," Clara said, crossing her arms. Her tone was playful but carried a sharp edge, a challenge he couldn't ignore. Julian hesitated but forced himself to step forward, practicing the fluid, confident movements Veronica had drilled into him. Each step in his heels became a delicate dance, every tilt of his head and sway of his hips carefully measured. Clara's eyes followed him like a hawk, assessing, judging, testing the limits of his composure. The first slip came unexpectedly. As he turned to greet her, one heel caught slightly on the rug. Julian stumbled, barely catching himself, a jolt of panic shooting through him. Clara's smirk widened slightly, sensing the crack in his performance. He felt the pressure intensify, realizing that the stakes were higher than ever. The exposure was no longer hypothetical. Recovering his balance, he forced a soft laugh, higher-pitched than usual, tilting his head gracefully. "Almost had me there," he said, voice trembling slightly, but controlled. Clara raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, and Julian's anxiety spiked again. As the tension escalated, the situation grew more complex. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, and Julian's heart sank. Veronica had warned him. No interruptions, no surprises. Another visitor now meant improvisation under scrutiny. He glanced at Clara, who seemed equally intrigued and suspicious. With a gulp, Julian opened the door to reveal Mrs. Holloway, the nosy neighbor, peering curiously inside.
"Oh,
"I just wanted to drop by and meet Veronica's niece," she said cheerfully. Her eyes roved over Julian, who felt his pulse hammering in his ears. Each word, each glance, felt loaded with the potential for disaster. Julian forced a smile, voice light and airy. "Of course. Come in, please." The interactions were a delicate balancing act. He laughed, gestured, and responded to compliments with practiced ease, all while maintaining the persona he had cultivated over hours of preparation. Yet beneath the surface, a storm of emotions raged. The fear of exposure, the thrill of acceptance, the surreal sensation of living as this feminine version of himself under direct observation. The climax intensified when Clara, leaning slightly forward, whispered teasingly, "You're doing well, but can you handle being completely yourself under pressure? Let's see how she reacts to a challenge." Before Julian could react, She dropped a small vase near the edge of the table. It wobbled precariously, and his immediate instinct was to reach for it. He stumbled in his heels, narrowly preventing it from toppling, and felt a rush of vulnerability that made his heart race. The act of rescuing the vase forced him to confront the duality of his existence, boy and girl, self and persona, simultaneously, each motion carrying weighty significance. The emotional intensity reached a peak as he realized how much he had immersed himself in the role. The physical transformation, the dress, wig, and heels, had become inseparable from the emotional one. Every smile, gesture, and laugh had been rehearsed, but now they were alive, reflexive, and fully embodied. He was teetering on the edge of exhilaration and terror, caught between the thrill of acceptance and the dread of discovery. Veronica returned unexpectedly, her sharp gaze sweeping over the room. "Julian," she said calmly, "you've handled it remarkably. But remember, the final part of this test isn't just performance. It's endurance under scrutiny, improvisation under pressure, and the ability to sustain your persona when all eyes are on you." The house suddenly felt smaller, every shadow more menacing, every sound amplified. Julian's pulse raced as he navigated a final series of social interactions, small talk with Mrs. Holloway, playful teasing from Clara, and Veronica's approving yet scrutinizing observation. Every movement mattered, every expression counted, and the stakes had never been higher. Then the final, symbolic moment arrived. As he reached for a cup of tea, his wrist brushed the edge of the table, tipping a delicate teacup. Time seemed to slow. The cup teetered, the liquid sloshing toward the edge. Julian's mind raced. Was this the moment his dual identity would fracture? With a surge of focus, he steadied the cup just in time, his breath catching. The relief was immediate, yet the adrenaline lingered, leaving him shaking slightly. He realized the lesson Veronica had embedded in the test. The minutiae of appearance, behavior, and confidence were all crucial, but mastery came from maintaining composure under the unpredictable pressures of life. The climax ended on a tense, unresolved note. Julian had succeeded in the immediate challenges, but the lingering question hung heavy. Could he sustain this delicate balance of identities, persona and self, under constant scrutiny? The exhilaration of triumph was tempered by the ever-present fear of exposure. Julian stood in the middle of the living room, the adrenaline still thrumming through his veins. He had survived Clara's teasing, Mrs. Holloway's inquisitive visit, and even the perilous teacup incident. Every second had been a trial, a delicate balance of poise, charm, and improvisation. Yet, even in this brief moment of triumph, a gnawing unease crept in. Veronica, her eyes sharp and calculating, stepped closer, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You've done well, Julian," she said, her voice smooth and approving. "But the true test isn't over yet. Endurance and vigilance are key. One mistake could undo everything." Julian nodded, trying to steady his trembling hands. His reflection in the ornate mirror across the room caught his eye, the perfectly styled wig, the flawless makeup, the elegant dress hugging his figure. Yet beneath the surface, he felt the weight of vulnerability, a tense awareness that this delicate persona could shatter at any moment. Clara leaned against the doorway, her expression a mix of amusement and curiosity. "I must admit," she said, her tone teasing but edged with seriousness, "you've pulled this off better than I expected. But I wonder, how long can you keep it up without slipping?" Julian forced a soft laugh, brushing a strand of wig from his face. "Longer than you think," he replied, though uncertainty lurked in his voice. Every movement felt scrutinized, every glance potentially catastrophic. Suddenly, the sound of a key turning in the front door made his heart lurch. Veronica's mother, Mrs. Langley, was home earlier than expected. Panic surged through Julian. He froze, his mind racing. Should he retreat to the bathroom, abandon the persona, or risk being caught? Every option carried potential disaster. Mrs. Langley entered, humming softly, her eyes scanning the room. "Is everything all right in here?" she called out. Her tone was casual, but Julian could feel the invisible weight of scrutiny pressing down on him. He stepped forward, trying to maintain composure. Yes, Aunt Veronica and we were just practicing for the, presentation tomorrow, he stammered, the words feeling clumsy on his lips. His heels clicked softly against the hardwood floor, an audible reminder of the precarious balance he had to maintain. Mrs. Langley's gaze lingered on him, and for a terrifying moment, Julian felt completely exposed. The carefully constructed facade teetered on the brink. A bead of sweat ran down his temple, and he pressed a hand gently to the side of his face, adjusting the wig as if that could stabilize his entire world. Then, Clara's mischievous smile widened. She whispered, just loud enough for Julian to hear, "One wrong move, and it's all over." The room seemed to contract around him. The polished reflection in the mirror, the soft swish of the dress, the gentle click of heels, they all became amplified symbols of the duality he carried, the boy he was and the girlish persona he had painstakingly created. One wrong step could expose him, unraveling the persona Veronica had meticulously crafted through her schemes. Julian's pulse thundered in his ears as Mrs. Langley walked closer, her attention finally settling on him fully. His hands trembled slightly, and for a fleeting second, the fear of being caught eclipsed every other emotion. And then, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. The timing was perfect and terrible. Julian froze, glancing at Veronica, who raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. The suspense hung thick in the air, as if time itself had paused to watch his next move. Julian's breath caught. Should he open the door? Pretend to be someone else? Or was this the moment everything would collapse? The camera of life, as if recording his story for 1,000 viewers, lingered on his wide eyes, the subtle quiver of his lips, and the poised but trembling posture he desperately tried to maintain. And in that moment, the room held its collective breath, leaving Julian and the audience on the knife edge of revelation.